Hello and welcome to Views on News. I am Jawad Tehami. Pakistan's economy recently has been faced with many challenges, and due to the recent devastating climate-induced floods, these difficulties were raised to quite an extent. But the present government, under the leadership of Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, is taking some very concrete measures and difficult decisions in order to steer the economy out of these difficulties. A high-level meeting regarding this, the overall economic outlook of the country, was held, where the Prime Minister emphasized to encourage exports by facilitating the new startups, particularly in the IT sector. And he has also emphasized on saving energy, which he says is the national need at this point in time. According to Information Minister Maryam Aurangzeb, an emergency energy saving plan has been chalked out, which will be implemented in coordination with all the provinces. At the same time, Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif has also expressed the resolve to complete the IMF program. Finance Minister Aqdas has also said that all the performance criteria regarding the 9th review of the IMF program are complete. At the same time, IMF's resident representative to Pakistan has also said discussions with Islamabad officials have been constructive and productive regarding the 9th review. Today, there was a development. Pakistan Stock Exchange fell more than 500 points. This has been attributed by some to this very delayed 9th review negotiations, and also to the continuously rising political uncertainty in the country. And we'll be talking about what measures, the difficult decisions the incumbent government is taking to steer the economy out of these difficulties. And to talk more about this, we are honored to have been joined in the studio by Mr. Ali Salman. He is Executive Director, Prime Institute, Policy Research Institute of Market Economy. Mr. Salman, thank you very much for being on the show tonight. And we're also honored to have been joined by Dr. Aqdas Afzal. He's Senior Economist. Dr. Afzal, thank you very much for your time, also for being on Views on News. And at the same time on Skype, we are being joined by Dr. Khaqan Najeeb. He's former advisor, Ministry of Finance. Dr. Najeeb, thank you very much for joining in at Views on News. Really appreciate your time. Let me begin the discussion with you, Dr. Afzal. The stocks fell today more than 500 points. Many are attributing it to the delayed 9th review of the IMF. At the same time, with the continuously rising political uncertainty, what core reasons do you associate with this particular fall of the PSX?
Thank you very much for inviting me to your show. Yes, the stock exchange fell about 558 points today, and I agree with your analysis that the main drivers behind this fall is basically the lack of confidence that investors are showing now that Pakistan's negotiations with the IMF, especially 9th review, have been somewhat delayed. On top of all this, I would like to remind your viewers that Pakistan's economy is trying to find a footing amidst a milieu of domestic political uncertainty and very, very challenging global economic conditions. So this combination of a somewhat delayed IMF 9th review, which is, mind you, is on track. There is nothing to worry about it, in my opinion, plus international challenging global economic conditions and rising political uncertainty, as you pointed out, are some of the reasons which are driving a wedge as far as investor confidence is concerned. And we saw evidence of that today in this decline of 558 points in the market. Yep.
Mr. Salman, when we talk about this fall, as Dr. Afzal has also mentioned, that it is associated, the one aspect of it is the delayed 9th review of the IMF, but he says there is nothing to worry about that much. And similar sort of comments and assurances have been given by the Finance Minister that all the performance criteria in this regard are in place. So the similar sort of statement coming from the IMF resident representative to Pakistan also, that the discussions had been productive. So why there is an apparent delay?
Well, I think the finance minister, when we hosted him in Pakistan Prosperity Forum yesterday, he made it very clear that the government remains committed to the program. The main reason of slight delay in the finalization of the program is on the estimation of the flood losses, because government of Pakistan has prepared
Welcome back to Views on News. We are discussing in today's Views on News the overall economic outlook of Pakistan and the kind of measures and the decisions the incumbent government is taking to steer the country's economy out of difficulties. We are joined in the studio by Mr. Ali Salman. He is Executive Director, Prime Institute, and Dr. Aqdas Afzal, he is Senior Economist. And on Skype, we are being joined by Dr. Khaqan Najeeb, former Advisor, Ministry of Finance. Let me resume the discussion with you, Dr. Khaqan Najeeb. Now, there's been a fall in the Pakistan stock exchanges today. It was over 500. As you've definitely heard, Dr. Aqdas Afzal and Mr. Salman, what core reasons do you associate with this particular sharp fall?
Thank you for having me on PTV World. I think Pakistan's challenges should be taken very, very seriously. Pakistan stands at a place where we have $6.7 billion of reserves. That's a serious position, considering that it covers a month and 10 days of our imports. We have a challenging balance of payments position, and any delay in the IMF from 3rd November hurts sentiment both domestically and internationally. Besides that, if you look at the figure of our remittances for November, it has also gone down to about $2.1 billion. And all these things are not only repercussions of what is going on globally, of course, but also the kind of challenges that the domestic economy faced prior to floods, then got hit with the floods, which have brought the growth rate, whether in manufacturing or in agriculture, to negative as the numbers that we are seeing. This is overall a very challenging picture. This challenging picture, of course, creates in the minds of the people that whether to hold the assets that they hold, whether it's in the stock market, or to buy a currency which the hard currency which has been appreciating, and especially the differences we see in the rate which is our interbank and which is our unofficial rate. That's the kind of environment in which the Pakistan economy is trying to muddle through. And to gain confidence, so we have to look forward. Pakistan must remain with the IMF, and IMF is not a very easy deal to do from here, because it's not only about what we did prior to September. I understand, I've run both IMF programs, even the current one and the past one, which the current government actually completed out of the 22 programs. They look till September, where we are fine largely, though there is fiscal slippage, and which is not a good sign. But largely the government has done all right. But right now, yes, there is a problem of floods estimations, which has disturbed our macro. So it's not very simple here. Macro means our GDP is disturbed, our inflation numbers are disturbed, our current account numbers are disturbed. So, and that's no fault of anyone, but that's how the situation stands. Then
so, Dr. Khaqan Najeeb, beg your pardon for the interruption. When the entire world knows the kind of catastrophe Pakistan was faced with because of the climate-induced floods and the kind of losses and the damages which were incurred, don't you think that is very much clear to the IMF officials also? And they must show a little bit of flexibility and relaxation, and especially when the finance minister categorically says that all the performance criteria are in order.
So as I said, that's true. Till September, we are all right. It's the forward-looking issue which is more of a concern to us even, we have a GDP growth which will slow down, and we are trying to slow it down as well. That hurts our FPR collection. So it's a very difficult picture for the government, because they are trying to muddle through a macro position, which has gotten worse because we were hit with the floods, wheat, cotton crop, rice crop, lots of disturbance. We see the October number on the large scale manufacturing even contracting more than one would have liked for it to contract. And at the same time, there is pressure of imports, which they are trying to curtail. And I think on the current account, the government's done a very good job. Our current account has come down to $2.8 billion and is now hovering under 400 million, and that's a good job. But you also have to remember that there is a financial account in which we have other aspects like the foreign direct investment, and this is not a time to be able to find that where we are having difficulty. The best course of action, of course, from here is both for IMF to understand what you have just put forward, at the macro and the fiscal picture to them, where we the data which convinces them to come back on table. That is for Pakistan the best way forward. The government is committed to doing so. One has no doubts about it. The government has also done some work to go to, for example, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to find $3 billion. I think that's excellent. Right now, deposit in the State Bank of Pakistan to shore up our reserves is the best way to give what you started the conversation with. To shore up our reserves gives us the confidence that we remain solvent, we remain comfortable. And I've always said, it's not about Pakistan's imminent default, which is not happening. It is the perception in the minds of the people, how we will sail through FY23, which causes more of an issue. And
right, your point is well taken. Dr. Najeeb, your point is well taken. Unfortunately, we are short of time. I'll have to bring in the other panelists in the discussion also. Dr. Afzal, what do you think? I mean, why is the IMF not considering the kind of situation Pakistan had to face, especially after the devastating floods and the losses and the damages incurred in the aftermath of that?
I think that is strictly not the case. I think the IMF is cognizant of the situation that Pakistan government and the nation is facing, and they have agreed to work with the government in coming up with a new economic and fiscal framework. So the government and the IMF have been working on new numbers, especially with respect to numbers for fiscal deficit. I think that there is another sticking point, and that sticking point has to do with our policy when it comes to the exchange rate. And I think there are certain voices emanating from the IMF and certain scholars associated with the IMF, which are now trying to belabor the point that given the liquidity challenge that is now emerging for the government, it might be prudent to think about moving towards a market determination of the exchange rate. So I think that really is the sticking point between the government and the IMF, and that really is the challenge that Pakistan is facing. So Pakistan is not facing a solvency issue, it is facing a liquidity issue. And I think through mutual consultations, I see both parties agreeing to a unified position on the subject.
Don't you think it has much to do with the speculators and the kind of stance the finance minister has taken since he took over the reins? And he also said the abuses of currency manipulation must be checked as we have constraints of the forex reserves. And he also mentioned that we have recently started operations and customs captured
$100,000.
Yes, exactly. So that has more to deal with those speculators, and the government is already
right. So look,
cracking down on them.
The finance minister's heart is in the right place. I mean, I understand why he wants to have exchange rate in this range, because we import a lot of things, primarily fuel, medicines, so on and so forth. And if our exchange rate depreciates against the dollar, everything that common people in this country buy is going to become more expensive, and that is going to fuel even more inflation compared to before. So I think the finance minister's heart is in the right place. Yes, through a market determination of the exchange rate, there is going to be a consumption crisis. But what we are trying to achieve in the international milieu, in which there are constant and continuous increases in the interest rate both in Europe and the United States, it is now becoming extremely difficult for us to maintain this kind of an exchange rate. So I think where his heart is in the right place, and I understand his concerns, I think we also have to look at the ground realities, which have to do with global economic situation, in which keeping our exchange rate where it is right now is going to be a very, very tough nut to crack.
Right. Mr. Salman, your take regarding this very particular point, this exchange rate. Is it under the consideration when we talk about the ninth review negotiations with the IMF and the kind of stance that has been taken by Finance Minister Aqdas, and that is what exactly he said at a seminar that was organized at your very institute also?
Right. I think I agree with this point that exchange rate is one of the major pillars of the program. But I think I would also like to say that the finance minister and the government has remained committed to the market-based exchange rate. While the commitment at the policy level is there are administrative issues such as like smuggling or hard currency, and that has to be stopped. This kind of acts cannot be allowed. But I would like to mention a couple of other sticking points here. So, for instance, when you talk about IMF and why it's the delay. I would like to bring in subsidies and particularly in respect of about $3.5 billion of mostly loans but some part of aid which we have received under a climate post-floods rehabilitation package from different donor agencies. And one of the points which have been raised by international donors, including IMF, that how this has been used and why this has been used, for instance, for subsidies for textile sector, right? Because this was meant to be primarily funding for the losses of our agriculture infrastructure, industrial infrastructure due to the floods. And when you see that this is being redirected, and actually Finance Minister was asked this question and he said, well, we need more export-oriented industry, and so therefore the government was obliged to redirect. But this has become a sticking point that why are you using funds, let's say, received
but
for
the government
climate.
understands better way to direct that money in order to get the maximum dividend in order to at least stabilize the economy.
Well, you and I can say that, but when it's lenders' money, and the lenders' money is usually coming from with certain conditions and expectations. So that is something which we have to.
Giving a boost to exports, that has been emphasized by Prime Minister also during that high-level meeting. Also, let me go to Dr. Khaqan Najeeb. When we talk about boosting exports and encouraging them, especially when we talk about the IT sectors, what future prospects do you associate with that particular sector? Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif has emphasized to encourage that sector and to increase that volume from the current $2 billion to $5 billion, and there remains to be a potential in that.
So of course, every time we've gone to the fund, it is because Pakistan has had a balance of payments crisis. All these 22 times that we've been to the fund, Pakistan starts to grow. So the economy has gotten wired in a manner where we start to grow as soon as we cross 4.5%. Our imports become higher, around 25% of GDP. Our exports, and I wrote an article in Dawn today, and I mentioned in that, our exports of our exports today are under 10% of GDP. The whole nation of 230 million people exports $30 billion, which is almost half of the amount that you need to do, considering that you're just 20 years ago you were at 16% of GDP. Our imports are an issue, but not as much of an issue as the fall in the 6% of GDP. So all that we must look forward to once we make a structural agenda for Pakistan is what we can sell to the world, what are the services we can do to the world. We have $19 billion in textiles out of the 30 billion. That's our that's what we are trying to sell. So we have to go much beyond that. And of course, service sector, And this used to be just $1 billion a couple of years ago, not even, about 2 years ago we were doing ITES. And we have done good work over the last 2 years in this, which is continuing even today. And there is a potential to take it to about $5 billion. And that's fine. But at the same time, you have to become part of some global value chain, which means that you have to sell something to the world. You can't produce cars and have a car industry which you are subsidizing for the last 2-3 decades, but still selling cars within Pakistan. That
Dr. Khaqan,
perspective.
to enhance the production and to sell something to the world, you need to have the industry over here and industrial base, and for that you need to import the raw materials and the machinery also. That has also been emphasized by Prime Minister, that we should identify the new markets and also import the raw materials and machinery. Now, this particular import, as the incumbent government has been trying to curtail imports, and it is focusing on exports. Now, this particular import of raw materials and machinery, does it also come under the ambit of the same imports which the government was trying to reduce?
So, Jawad, what we are trying to mainly reduce is what we call in Chapter 84 and 85. This covers the non-essential import that we do, which is about 15%, and does not cover the raw material or the machinery that we need to import. But at the same time, you must remember, being in a severe dollar liquidity crunch, and I don't really favor administrative measures, but the kind of administrative measures that State Bank or the central bank has had to take are necessary in the short run, because we can't pick up our exports. What I hear from Aptima and what I hear from other the auto people, yes, their even raw material partly is hurt, but of course this is a transitory period, and as we move into a fund program, as we move into receiving monies from Saudi Arabia, as we move into removing this dollar liquidity overhang that we have developed, this would ease, and only Chapter 84 and 85, which covers 15% of non-essential imports, would remain there. You also have to remember that over the last few years, 570 billion rupees has gone to these industrialists to import machinery under the term TURF, which is a financing facility for 10 years at almost 1%. So it is not that we have not financed the large players. Now we need to use that. The textile is sitting on some kind of import impetus that they could give. So all this will come through, but we have to pass through this short-termism in which we are trying to curtail our imports, but still manage our exports. The other thing that has happened...
Dr. Najeeb, unfortunately, we are short of time. I have to bring this one once again. Let me bring in Dr. Aqdas Afzal. Enhancing exports and enhancing the industrial base. What should ideally be done, especially at this point in time when there are so many challenges all around?
Look, right now, I believe despite all the challenges that Pakistan's economy is facing and the very, very bleak global economic situation, I think there is a path available to Pakistan's economy through October of next year. But we must stay the course by following a tight fiscal, tight monetary regime. We must not be distracted by politically motivated subsidies. And the IMF program must be completed by this government. And whatever the sticking points are, I think those need to be resolved by both sides. And I think given this, once this stabilization has been reached by Pakistan's economy, we would then be in a position to then launch Pakistan's exports, and because that really remains the ultimate solution that is going to deliver us from these very testing economic times.
Right. Mr. Salman, your take regarding enhancing the exports, building the industrial base, and especially when it comes to importing the raw material and machinery on one end, and on the other, when it comes to the IT exports and increasing its volume also.
So, I mean, the export diversification and enhancing the industrial base is a long-term project, and it cannot be achieved overnight. What can be done maybe in 6 months to 1 year is a reform in our tariff structure, which is unfortunately has a strong anti-export bias at the moment. We are a unique country in the world where about 40% of our tax revenue comes from import stage of taxes, which is import duties, but also advanced taxes, advanced sales tax. And no other country collects that much tax at the import level except Pakistan. And that is something which is in the hand of the government. And I hope that this crisis can at least teaches us a lesson for reform, which can be done in 1 to 2 fiscal cycles, and which automatically will provide incentives for global supply chain, for industrialists, for exporters to be able to better connect with the international supply chain and increase the level of productivity in the country, increase the level of skill level in the country, and therefore build the export base in a significant manner.
Right, Dr. Khaqan, there was emphasis on another aspect, energy saving. The Prime Minister says it's the national lead at this point in time, and an emergency plan to save energy has also been chalked out, which will be presented to the Cabinet in its further meeting that is going to come, and it is going to be implemented in coordination with the provinces. How crucial is the implementation of such an emergency plan when it comes to energy saving? As Information Minister also said that import bill regarding this petroleum products happens to be $29 billion, and after the implementation of this plan it would be substantially reduced. Dr. Khaqan, can you hear me, please?
Balance payments challenge. Yes, can you hear me?
Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Yeah. So I have been saying this for the past 8 months since Pakistan got into a balance of payments challenge or a heightened balance of payments challenge, that your best bet is to conserve energy. What does that mean? That means that this import bill ranging from 24 billion to 29 billion that we hit last year could be shaved off by at least 10%, which saves you about $2.4 billion. That's a lot of money. How could you do that? Close commercial at 6 o'clock. Do business in on even oil. At least tell the people of Pakistan that there is an urgency in Pakistan. Tell the people of Pakistan that they have to change their behavior. In Japan, they are telling their people, wear sweaters, do not heat up your rooms. I was just in, even they are trying to keep the heat levels to a much more decent level than they used to be, because the gas is
right. I'll have to interrupt over here. Dr. Khaqan Najeeb, once again beg your pardon. Unfortunately, we are short of time today and we'll have to end the show today right here. We were honored to have been joined in the studio by Mr. Ali Salman, Executive Director, Prime Institute, and Dr. Aqdas, Afzal, Senior Economist. Thank you very much for your time, for being on the show. And on Skype, Dr. Khaqan Najeeb, former Advisor, Ministry of Finance. It's always enlightening to discuss these topics and issues with you. We really appreciate your time. As the government has helped over 33 million flood victims after the recent climate-induced devastating floods, it is trying its utmost to steer the economy out of the difficulties with difficult decisions at times also. With that note, we come to the end of today's show. Until the next one, take good care of yourself.